Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for another live taping of the Support is Sexy podcast. I am your host, Elayne Fluker, and I am so excited to welcome our guest today, Dawn E. Shedrick. I'm going to tell you all about Dawn, but just know that this is probably going to be a love fest, another love fest. I just love her to death. She is my sister from another mister, and just going to really talk about what it means to be the strong one. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that, what burnout is all about, and some other great topics around how we just make sure that we're managing our stress, anxiety, and being gentle with ourselves. So let me tell you about Dawn and we will get started. So Dawn Shedrick is CEO of Gen Tech's Training and Consulting, a company that provides personal development training, continuing education webinars, and career development for social workers. She knows all about burnout because she has been through it herself, which we're going to talk about. And Dawn has a mission of supporting social workers and caretakers with making sure that they take care of themselves as much as they take care of the people they serve. Dawn has both supported others with avoiding burnout and, again, had to learn how to do the same thing for herself. And Dawn, I'm super excited. I'm always excited to talk to Dawn on camera, off camera, on the phone, text. We just do all the things, DMs, everything. But Dawn is here because she is mentioned in my new book, Get Over I Got It. She is in chapter 6 called Stop Being the Strong One. So today she's going to talk to us again about the dangers of being the strong one, how to avoid burnout, why you need to unlearn, as she says, certain behaviors, and how to embrace support because we're all about it because support is sexy. So Dawn, my friend, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I love you, and I
I
appreciate
love you.
any opportunity to kick it with you, whether it's formally here and, like you said, text message, DM, carrier pigeon, whatever. So I'm
Exactly. We
super
kiki
grateful.
however we can. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So the first question I want to ask you, Dawn, is how do you define burnout? Because, we have to realize, as you said in my book, it's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's not just, this part of our cultural lexicon that has no meaning, right? I actually have embraced the formal psychological definition of burnout, which first and foremost, it's a process. So it doesn't just happen overnight. It's a process and it's a psychological syndrome. And there are three defining features of what we know as burnout. The first is, which is going to be familiar to many people, physical and emotional exhaustion. No other way to put it. No fancy psychological jargon. Physical and emotional exhaustion. The second feature of burnout is what they call a depersonalization. So you're just not as passionate about your work. And so in this context, we are talking about occupational burnout, right? You don't have that passion, that connection. Again, that's that exhaustion and overwhelm that's coming into play. And then the third feature, which I think is so important for people to really understand and get, that burnout is not just this little thing that we just talk about when we're tired. The very distinctive feature of burnout, occupational burnout, is that we have a diminished passion, we have a diminished commitment to our profession and our work. And so why is that important is because what I have found and what a lot of the research tells us is that people who don't think that burnout is a thing, because actually now it's a diagnosable medical condition, we'll come back to that.
Mm,
Um, but what a lot of people think is just, oh, I'm tired. I can just take the week off and take a staycation and I can go back to work. But the reality is there is a professional and occupational, work-related contribution to this experience of burnout, which could be, and it also applies to us that are entrepreneurs. Don't think that, oh, but I'm working for myself. I'm not working in an organization. I'm not working for anyone else. It could be back when I was a social worker, in my early days as a social worker, just because of, the dynamics of the nonprofit world and service provision, I often had heavy caseloads. I was serving many more people, many more families than I probably should have. But my agency or agencies that I worked for at the time had limited resources, right? So heavy caseloads, it could be that whatever the dynamics of your work or employment are, maybe you don't get enough, PTO time. Maybe you're not paid enough, right? Maybe your work exposes you to trauma and to hazards. Maybe there are significant occupational hazards. So, or maybe, we've just subscribed to that entrepreneurial grind, no sleep until you hit certain milestones that contributes to this exhaustion. So there is an occupational entrepreneurial, component that contributes to that experience of exhaustion and a disconnect from the work. That is what makes it burnout, which is now a diagnosable condition.
I feel seen and accused. Is that like
Both apply.
I feel both seen. I know, my goodness. So Ebony commented here and said, yes, large caseloads, shaking my head. Ebony, you obviously can
Okay,
relate.
Ebony, I feel your pain.
You feel the pain. And
Mhm.
anyone, of course, I forgot to mention, and thank you, Ebony, for your comment. If you have any questions for Dawn, any comments, I know we probably all can chime in different ways on burnout. Please go ahead and post them here, and I will make sure that we acknowledge them and ask her any questions we need to. But Dawn, first of all, let me for everybody who doesn't know, this is what happens when I talk to Dawn. It's always like, oh my gosh. In a good way, though. Like I'm learning something, but I'm like, it's me. She sees me. Why does she see me? I swear, because I will tell you all, I'll share a personal thing with you all. In the past few weeks, I would say, yeah, the past 2 or 3 weeks, I've been feeling all of the things that you just named as far as burnout. And I think I actually was wondering if it was more depression, which I've had struggled with on and off in the past. And maybe you can talk to us
I
about whether
will.
or not those symptoms are close. And I've talked to my coach about it, and she said, yes, maybe you are a little depressed, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I mean, of course, so much is going on in the world right now, especially for us Black women and just all of us as human beings, the COVID and everything, just everything. But I still, Dawn, couldn't put my finger. I'm surprised I didn't text you actually during this time. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it is. And now that you've described some descriptions of burnout, I'm certain that that was at least part of it. And it
Mhm.
sounds like burnout isn't only when things are going quote unquote bad, right? Sometimes we can burn out because it's going so good, you're just going. So
Absolutely.
tell us more. Tell us more. Talk about, well, it being diagnosed, as you said, it can be diagnosable now. And then also maybe the relation, as far as you know, to depression.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that, so I'm actually going to work backwards if you don't mind.
No, no problem.
I think it's so critical to understand. So the World Health Organization only deemed burnout as we know it as a diagnosable condition in 2019. So burnout, the term was first coined in 1974, the year I was born. So I'm 47. So we're, but I guess the groundbreaking pioneering research on occupational burnout happened later in the 70s. And so the first research was conducted on social workers, people who help people for a living, but it has expanded, obviously, when we think about the world of work in the world today. It has pretty much expanded and is applicable in pretty much anything, any occupation, any trade, any work anyone can do, right? For many, many years, part of the difficulty, from what I've gathered from the literature, part of the difficulty in making it a distinct, say, diagnosable condition is that in many people, it mimicked depression. It mimicked many forms of depression. There actually are many different forms of depression. Depression is not just one, illness, right? That's a whole other discussion. But it mimicked the most common features of depression. So it was really difficult to make the distinction. But then when you add in a lot of the advanced research around workplace wellness, workplace, the emotional connection to our work. And so it's only in 2019 that now it's diagnosable. So it's in the ICD-10, which is the World Health Organization's like medical manual that gives guidance on how to diagnose conditions, right? And so now that we have more, I mean, there's still a lot of work to do, but we have more guidance in really how to treat, support, burnout. But in the very least, now it's recognized. Like on the one hand, it's like, okay, it's recognized, so that is a good thing because then we can figure out the best ways to care for it. But then it's also like, well, dang, now it's a diagnosable medical condition that just by many of us going to work and doing our work, we're at risk of burning out,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, like that double-edged sword. right? And so many of the features of burnout, like more of this, if we look at the more specific signs and symptoms of burnout, many of them mimic like the literal clinical criteria for, let's say, major depression, which is the most common form of depression, right? So irritability it's and irritability actually is a symptom of most, if not all, forms of depression and other mental disorders that flies under the radar. Because when you think
Mm-hmm.
about irritability, we just think, oh, that person's in a bad mood today. Oh, this person is funky. This person, let me just stay away from them because they have a stank attitude, right? When it could be, a symptom of depression. So irritability,
Mm.
loss of concentration, extreme fatigue, sleep disturbances. Now, sleep disturbances could be insomnia, inability to sleep or to fall asleep. It could be what we call hypersomnia. You sleep 10, 11, 12 hours, but you don't feel like you got 11 hours of sleep, right? Or you could have intermittent sleep issues. You could fall asleep, you wake up. Sometimes I wake up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I can't fall back asleep, right? So there's sleep disturbances, right? So these are common features of depression that are also common features of what we know as occupational burnout, which made it really tricky and still does make it tricky for us to recognize it within ourselves. And that's why I said earlier, it's so important to understand that there's that occupational, that work component as well, that
Mm-hmm.
is starting to help us makes that distinction, in burnout.
Yes, so helpful. And you mentioned too something that just want to reiterate. Again, we're talking to Dawn Shedrick here about burnout and overcoming being the quote unquote strong one. And something that you said, Dawn, I think is important for us all to hear, whether that's going into whatever going into an office looks like for you. I should say working for a company or working for yourselves. Sometimes I think it's so dangerous for us working for ourselves because exactly what, again, I feel seen and
Mm-hmm.
accused because I think, I'm working for myself, I can manage my time. But then sometimes you look like, am I managing my time? Or am I
Mm-hmm.
just constantly thinking about this thing and burning myself out? So I want
Mm-hmm.
to ask Ebony's question of you, Dawn. Ebony, thank you for your question. Ebony said, how do you overcome burnout? Because the trauma is real. So let's talk
Absolutely.
about maybe whether it's some of the things you know from a clinical perspective or just in your own life. I know you've dealt with this as well. What are some things that we
Absolutely.
might look at?
Yeah, and thank you, Ebony, for being here, and thank you for that question. um, so I think one of the reasons why I think it's so important for us to keep this conversation like going and keep this conversation out there is that because when people better understand specifically what burnout is, then we're better equipped to recognize it in ourselves and in others. Like I train supervisors to recognize burnout in themselves, but also in the people that they supervise, right?
Mm.
And so understanding the dynamics, but also here's another, how can I say this? Um, we can't always guarantee that we can avoid burnout, which really stinks,
Mm.
right? However, um, a lot of the ways that we can take care of ourselves, like we're talking a lot more about mental health in our culture, especially among people of color, Black women in particular, right? We're talking about mental health, we're talking about depression, we're talking about anxiety. So, a lot of the ways that we can nurture ourselves and care for ourselves, right? Everything from establishing boundaries in your work, right? Including when you work for yourself, right? That's going to look like what that's going to look like is very specific to you. So, establishing boundaries could be either saying no, or if I've had people say to me, well, I can't say no to my supervisor. And I've said in some contexts you can, in some you can't. When you really think that you can't, maybe you can ask to renegotiate a deadline, renegotiate your caseload number, renegotiate your workload, right? Boundaries could also be not answering emails after a certain time. I'm telling on myself with that, right?
Right.
Not answering emails,
Yes.
or setting up specific times. I now put it in my calendar when I'm going to answer the emails, right?
Oh, that's a good
So
idea.
it's literally in my Google Calendar. This is when I'm going to look at emails, right? So setting boundaries, taking downtime for yourself, right? Using that. using that PTO that you do earn. Don't wait until the end of the year when somebody's telling you you have a week that you need to use within a week, right? And especially those of us that work for ourselves and are solopreneurs, like I have to schedule my time off, or sometimes I just put reminders in my Google Calendar to schedule time off. I have to give myself a reminder to do it, right?
Right. Remind yourself to schedule some time off. But just so true, because I've been thinking about that this summer. Like, what am I going to do this summer? What am I going to take off? What time am I going to
Exactly.
take off? Yes.
Right. Taking care of yourself physically. So whether it's if you have any health issues, take care of them, get the attention and the care that you need. If you and be aware of your stressors and not just
Mm.
work related. That's very, very important. What is it that stresses you out? Who is it that may be a stressor for
Who is it? You might need to restructure that relationship.
you? Exactly. Right. And also make sure that you're getting enough rest. So yeah, definitely make sure that you're getting enough rest. We're getting a lot more research on like the importance of sleep, like restorative sleep in terms of our health and our mental health, right? And here's another thing that I say, and I've had to say this to myself in terms of burnout, because as you said, I've been burned out literally, and I'll talk about that at one point, is that it may come to a point where you may have to make a decision about, am I going to remain in this particular position? Am I going to remain in this particular job with this particular organization? Right? I think so many times we convince ourselves that we have to stay. It's almost like being in a toxic relationship. It can be a toxic relationship. And I don't mean that like your supervisors or the people who own the company are like intentionally malicious people that intend to burn you out. Sometimes it's just the conditions that are not working for you and that are harming you. And so, like, I often do presentations or workshops now, webinars with folks who work in civil service jobs where I can't leave here. I got these benefits and I have this, but you're also burnt out.
Right. And making
And
yourself
are you
sick.
going to be here to enjoy that pension that you're saying is the reason why you stay in this job? Right. And so, and I know that that's not an easy decision. Don't, make no mistake about it. But we at least have to be able to dig into that and really explore that and ask ourselves those hard questions, because sometimes the best way to deal with the burnout is to remove yourself, from that environment. And
Hmm.
so, I'm not telling anybody, don't tell anybody, well, Dawn Shedrick said quit my
I
job.
know we ain't say no, it ain't nobody
But
say
what I'm
that.
saying,
Nobody said that.
but what I'm
But
saying is
I think what you said is
give
know
yourself
that you
permission,
have a choice. Give
give
yourself
yourself
permission.
permission to explore it and to make the choices. Yeah.
Make the choice. Exactly. People
Mhm.
say, well, I can't. It's like, well, can't you could, but let's talk about what the choice looks like, right?
Right.
Ebony said, good idea. We'll have to use that. Let us know which
Thank
one
you.
resonated with you, Ebony. Yes. And if you have any more questions, again, anyone else, if you have any more questions, I'm talking to Dawn E. Shedrick, who is talking to us about burnout, how to overcome being the strong one. We've all heard that. Most of us have heard that term before. And I'm just loving this conversation, Dawn, about occupational burnout, like really diving into that. And honestly, as I've mentioned, I think I'm there. I think I'm there. And it's a scary, I wouldn't say scary isn't the word. Again, for me, I think the uncertainty of not being able to peg what is going on right now.
Hmm.
But it's just that feeling like feeling tired or feeling like not as enthusiastic about doing the things that I previously was enthusiastic about. Of course, there's going to be stuff you don't want to do.
Right.
You're not enthused. But if it's like, well, this was fine before, why am I not feeling it now? And it just, so let's talk about, you talked about what we can do um, from looking at our, especially in our work environment and those kind of things and taking care of ourselves. But are there any things that you think we can do that's just for us? So is it like, yeah, is there anything that we could do that's just for us, whether that's a vacation or whether that's, well, so for example, one of the things that I am going to try to do, totally random, has nothing to do with that. The outcome does not matter to anyone in the world other than the flower, gardening. I'm gonna find, right? Like I'm gonna find a community garden and just I was talking to my coach about this. She's like, oh, well, you could do this sport or do that, but like all those things I have to win. Like I need something where the outcome says nothing about me or it says nothing about nobody else. It's just,
Hmm.
so that's an example of something that I've wanted to try. It's something I think I'll enjoy, and it's not, nothing's riding on that other than my pleasure and fulfillment. So what are some things that you might suggest?
Well, I think there are a few key words that you just said when you shared that that are so critical. And the first thing that you said is that you're not attached to the outcome. It's
Not
really just
attached.
about you digging in and enjoying it. And what happens when we're burnt out, what happens when we also are depressed, and also happens when we're anxious, right? Is that we detach from the things and the people many times that bring us joy, that give us
Mm,
a sense of fulfillment, right? If you think about it, if you're burnt out, and you love to dance, are you gonna be dancing all day, every day? Like, right? It's gonna take you away from the things that nourish you and that sustain you and that bring you joy that you deserve, right? And so, not having an attachment to the outcome, right? So, I'm going to set the intention that you're going to be like the gardener of the universe.
no,
However,
stop it, because then
however,
now I'm going to try to be the gardener of the
I'm going to
universe.
say, I don't say that to put pressure on you, but I just know how you get down.
Right.
You, you excel at everything that you do, but yes, not attached to the outcome and enjoying the process of it. Enjoy the process of digging your hands in the earth, right? Of making that connection to the earth and just giving the love and the nurturing necessary to grow life, to enjoy that and learn along the way, right? So it's doing those kinds of things, right? Pay attention to the things that you love that you have gotten away from or that you convinced yourself you didn't have time for, right? That's like
Mm,
those are the questions I ask myself when I realize I need to reconnect with something, right? And also, support is sexy. Give yourself permission to seek support, whether that's from a professional, whether it's a mental health practitioner, a coach, whether it's your doctor or a physician, right, for any physical issues, whether it's asking for help with some of the tasks, whether it's work related or just personally, right? Give yourself permission, know that you're worthy and that you deserve that support because that is just as significant as anything else in actually like caring for yourself when you are burnt out or when you believe you're burnt out. So
mm-hmm.
it is about just like connecting with the self and giving ourselves that love that so many of us that burn out are so quick to give everybody else. Right. So yeah.
Especially in these industries that we're talking about, like you said,
Oh
social
yeah.
work, of course, is your background and the people that you help, caregivers, all the people who are in these giving, whether you're naturally that person or I think especially if it is your occupation, it's just
Right.
not even not caring for yourself is sometimes not a part of your day, if that makes
Mhm.
sense, right? It's all
Mhm.
about output as opposed to what am I taking in for myself.
Absolutely. And there's one other thing that I also wanted to make sure that I mention in terms of burnout is stress, right? The experience of stress. A stress is another one of those terms. It actually does have different definitions and different contexts, but it also is one of those, it's almost a phenomenon at this point that almost like burnout, like so many of us, most of us, like if you just start Googling stress, if you see it in the media, you see it in medical, literature, like we are at a crisis point. We've been at a crisis point in terms of stress. you know, the way that our bodies react to stressors, right? We're reacting in 2021 the same way our earliest human ancestors did thousands and thousands of years ago. We have not
Mm-hmm.
adapted. So we may have FaceTime, we may be about to beam each other up like Scotty, but we have not adapted in terms of how we respond to stress and how stress impacts our bodies. So stress, which is par for the course with burnout, right? It literally can lessen our expiration date on the planet. It can increase our risk of pretty much almost every medical and mental health condition on the planet. It can exacerbate any health issues that we may currently be, living with. And so that's another, for me, it's like another call to action. We can't, unfortunately, if this week more than any other has taught us, we can't always control what is going to stress us, unfortunately. But we can be empowered to take, responsibility and to take ownership of our environment and how we care for ourselves and each other, you know.
Yes.
Um,
And
and
would
so
you
we
say
definitely have to be mindful of stress in terms and its impact on us in terms of burnout.
Yes, and I think, like as you said, we can't necessarily control the stress and things that come in. But then, to speak to environment for a second, I think we also have to remember not even just our surroundings or the people around us, but the digital environment or TV. Right now. So for me, I didn't watch the Chauvin trial. I
Yeah, I
saw
didn't
some of
either.
I just knew it was going to be too triggering and
Mhm.
traumatizing to go through the experience again. I mean, and even just some of the snippets that I heard, it's just like, oh, it was longer than we thought. Just these things, and not even just to bring it up again. But
Right.
for me, that was a control thing that I just felt like I need to protect myself or my sanity from that, because I know how it's going to. Now, of course, the overall thing, I'm aware of it. I know
Of
what's going on,
course.
because some people will
Of
say,
course.
oh, you have to try it, watch it. No, you don't. Like all those videos that come out, I don't watch those. I already know what
Mhm.
happened.
Right.
That's the sad thing too. You are so whatever. I just want to mention for people, remember that counts as part of your environment too, because all that
Absolutely.
information, even if you look at it sometimes, but if it's constant, that's actually, it was a form of torture, and still is, but certainly for enslaved Africans, was watching someone else be tortured. It's not
Absolutely.
normal to watch someone else that looks like you go through these horrible experiences. So just being aware too that that's
Mhm.
part of your environment. And
Absolutely.
Ebony said, I had to start going to therapy. Yes, Ebony, we're proud of you. I had to learn how to care for me because I was giving to everyone and putting me on the back burner. And she also mentioned stress will also make you gain or lose weight. Yes, looking at
Absolutely.
monitoring your stress, right. And she went
Absolutely.
gardening. Where are you,
Go
Ebony?
ahead,
Ebony said, I
Ebony.
just did a community garden. I'm like, all in Ebony's business. Where you at? I'm looking for one here in Decatur, Georgia, or Atlanta. Yes, excellent. So, Dawn, talk to us a little bit about something that you mentioned in the book. Again, Dawn is in chapter 6 of Get Over I Got It, which comes out May 11th, talking about this topic that she's diving in with us here. What were some of the things? Well, first, define what you meant when you said we need to unlearn some things. And then what would you say were some of the things that you felt like you needed to unlearn to better take care of yourself?
Absolutely. Um, Unlearning for me has just been a process of digging into, reflecting on, deconstructing, the ways in which I was conditioned to not seek support, right? How was I conditioned around what it meant to be independent and to be, self-actualized and self-directed, right? And um, I can't remember exactly where I first saw and really grasped the term unlearning, but I know I embraced it in a way that gave me permission, like I said, gave me permission to really dig into ways that I was raised and conditioned in my family, socially, and give myself permission to possibly rework, or if not completely remove those from my mindset, right? And I'll give you an example. So, um, my paternal grandmother, one of my favorite ancestors, lived to be 93 years old, and she was raised in rural Jim Crow, Georgia, right? Her mom came up north in the Great Migration, and she soon followed. And so she literally was raised where, she had to use the colored only, facilities and water fountains. And but she was also very vivacious. She also knew how to get and do what she wanted. And that's how she raised us. And so, one of the things that she raised us on verbatim, if you want something done right, you do it yourself,
I
right?
knew you were going to say
Most of
that.
my life, because most of my life, I've carried that with me, right? I set goals. I do what I have to do to achieve them. I don't wait for other people to do things. Even when I've come to rely on people, if somebody makes a commitment to do something, if they don't do it, I'm literally the one that will jump up and do it, right? And everything else that comes with that. So for most of my life, and in some ways even now, I still embrace that. Like that's my grandmother's wisdom. But I also, in digging into that, I then had to dig into, well, how was she conditioned in that? I wasn't raised in the same circumstances as her, right? So, what it meant for her and how it got her where she got in her 93 years on this planet might not necessarily be what's going to work for me in 2020, 2021, especially considering, how we're living now, right? And so I had to really dig into that. And there was a process that I almost felt like, well, I don't want to betray what my grandmother, one of my favorite people, like how she raised me, right? So I had to like negotiate that. I had to renegotiate that. There are aspects of that that I had to unlearn and that I had to let go, because that mentality in most contexts, it served me well. And don't, let me not act like it hasn't served me well. It's helped me get stuff done. But it also, like, I had to release the parts of that I had to be honest with myself contributed to my overwhelm and my burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's, for many of us, and I'm going to venture to say, especially for Black women, let's just say that,
Right.
right? But for many of us, that unlearning is really like, it's like digging into and sitting with, thinking through, talking through, writing through, however that's going to work for us individually. But how is it that I have come to adopt this mindset? How have I been conditioned, right? And then it's about like being present and giving yourself permission to be open to, okay, but what's going to work for me, Dawn, in 2021? What's going to work for me, right? And so it's a process. It's not always pretty, but I can tell you that like the results like definitely are working for me, you know.
What
Um,
are some results that you've seen from unlearning certain behaviors? And I think I think it's so powerful what you said, especially what's passed down to us, and admitting that it can serve us in some
mhm,
ways, right? That's sometimes why it's hard, but realizing, is this working for me? And is this working for me right now? Right? The
absolutely.
world is constantly changing and things are constantly changing. What have been some results that you've seen from just adjusting your mindset around this?
Well, first and foremost, like my mental health, right? And my wellness like has benefited, from that, because a lot of times I was so overwhelmed because I was doing way too much, doing the most, capital
Hmm.
THE, right? The
Right.
THEE, the most. Not
The most.
I was doing the most because I literally, and I really think like I was the poster child for overwhelm and burnout, because I'm the firstborn. I've been the caretaker for family members who are and who have been disabled. I'm a Pisces. I'm a social worker by profession, right? So I have taken on everything. I'm an empath. I take it all on as if like that's just what I was born to do, right? But what it has helped me do is it has helped me again enhance my health and wellness, because I was hospitalized for exhaustion once, literally.
Mm,
So it definitely has helped in terms of my health. It has helped in terms of me seeing an increase in revenues in my business, because I got to a point where I realized, well, I can't be the consultant, the trainer, the social worker, and the administrator in my business. And so when I let go of the superwoman complex and initially I hired an assistant. I now have a team, right? I can focus on the aspects of my business that are going to allow it to grow and you know, to expand. Yes, to bring in more revenue, but to actually have more impact, which is more important to me, right?
mhm, mhm.
It has not only deepened my sacred relationships, but it also has helped me weed out the relationships that were not serving me or that were toxic, right? It also has enabled me to make more informed decisions about what I commit to, whether it's professionally or personally, And so, again, like that, there's as much value in the unlearning as there is in the learning.
I love that. I love that.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I mentioned that I learned a long time ago, I mention it often, but deciding, getting to the point, I think where, like you said, you're making the decision about where to focus, what to let go of, and those kind of decisions, which are decisions we're making every day, whether we're conscious of it or not, right?
Right.
You're either saying yes to everything or no to everything, or a little bit of being conscious of what you're saying yes to. But the thing is, you have to decide what matters and what doesn't matter. If you decide that it matters, then it should matter a lot. If you decide
Mhm.
that it doesn't matter, then it shouldn't matter at all. So that was something I learned a while ago from this woman that I used to work for. And I was like, that makes so much sense. It just makes it be like, you know what? I decided this matters to me. So whether that's your wellness, your health, your family, like you said, your sacred relationships, I'm going to figure out this matters a lot. Not to say it's going to take all of your time, but are you making time for that? Or as you said, you have a reminder on your schedule, because you taking time off as an entrepreneur matters to you. If you
Mm-hmm.
decide that something doesn't matter, it's like, you know what, for me, certain projects or things that I want to work on, can't do that right now. I have to say
Right.
no to that right now. It might not be forever, but just like me trying to do splitting my energy in all these different ways, I'm not going to be, as you said, as impactful. So I had to unlearn. You have to do all the things all the time, all by yourself at every month. It's just like you're not doing anything except burning out, which is what
Right.
we want to avoid. Rosalind,
Exactly.
hi Rosalind. Rosalind gave us a praise hand here. Thank you, Rosalind.
Hi, Rob.
Anyone, if you have any other questions or anything or comments for Dawn, thank you so much. Dawn, one thing I want to ask you, well, there's so many things, but another thing I want to ask you is if you could say, if there was something that you could tell, I think, especially the folks who are in your industry, whether they're social workers, caregivers, whatever other counselors, people who really care for other people, or just our caregivers in general. But I'm thinking especially for those who work in the field, whether you're an entrepreneur or someone who is within an organization. What do you feel? Maybe what's the one thing you want to make sure those folks know? Or a lesson that maybe you wish someone had told you maybe in the beginning of your journey in that industry? What's something that maybe they don't always hear and need to hear at this time?
Yeah. It's two-pronged. The first thing that that I offer is that you deserve to be healthy and to thrive no matter what type of work you are doing. You deserve to be happy, healthy, fulfilled, and thrive. No matter if you are have a cesspool business, if you are a dog trainer, a trauma specialist, you know, a physician, if you're selling cotton candy at the carnival, no matter what it is that you are doing, you deserve it. There's no other qualifiers in my book anyway. The other thing that I say is, which I kind of touched on earlier in the conversation, is sometimes you have to have the courage to make decisions that are going to ensure your health, that may seem very difficult, that may seem impossible. But even just giving yourself permission to consider making these decisions is the best first step. Because I think, a lot of times, like, our mindset, for many different reasons, tells us we just have to deal with this. We have to stay stuck. This is par for the course. There's no way out. I'm just going to have to, surrender myself to this. And no, you might not be able to make a snap decision overnight and make a change, right? But at least giving yourself permission to know that there are other options is, I believe, the best first step forward. So just don't convince yourself that you just have to roll with it and that you have to rock with it. If you're in a situation that is causing you stress, that is burning you out, that is impacting your health, and your wellness and your well-being.
Do you think that's awesome advice? Rosalind says, "Hello, great conversation. Thank you, Rosalind." Something else that you mentioned in the book? Again, John is in chapter 6. Stop being the strong one. Something else you talked about that we can close with is this idea too of being, and you mentioned this for yourself, being courageous enough to let go of the identity as the strong one, or sort of tethering ourselves to these identities no one asked us necessarily to be, or maybe they did and we just adopted it, as you said, from your grandmother and took it on forever. How can we make sure that we are not sort of doing this to ourselves? In other words, you've told us how to take care of ourselves, but I guess maybe do you think it's a good time for us to self-reflect and just be aware of, am I tying myself to this identity, as I always say, the strong one, the sufferer, the savior, that we have all these different identities we attach ourselves to that we might be helping people, but in the same time, we're making ourselves sick, burnt out, and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that you use that specific term, identity, right? Because many of us believe that identity is fixed. And so if I identify this way, then that's who I am. It's ingrained in my personality and it's never going to change. When the truth is that our identity or identities are shaped by so many different factors, right? Culturally, the people around us, our experiences, et cetera, et cetera. And so just understanding that that shaping is almost like shape shifting, right? Over time, you do not have to attach to the identity, because when we attach to a particular identity, we tend to fall in alignment with actions and behaviors and ways of being and doing that tend to be associated with that identity, right? And so we don't have to conform to any of those expected behaviors, right? So I'm the caretaker. I have to sacrifice myself. I have to put everybody else first. I can't center myself. I can't prioritize my own health because I have to do for everybody else, everybody else, everybody else. No, you don't have to do that. We can be caretakers. We can prioritize ourselves so that we can give to others, so that we can extend our expiration date, right? So that we can give more, but without sucking the life out of us along the way. So if you find that you do identify in certain ways with being the strong one, with not having to ask for help because I'm independent, like that's one of the most incorrect and unfortunate misconceptions about being independent, right? Even the term independent, we can debate whether that's
And the term independent is problematic. I know.
right. That's a whole other. But just know that, as somebody who studies and teaches about identity, understand that it shape shifts. You do not have to permanently attach yourself to certain behaviors and ways of living your life because you identify, as the strong person, you identify as independent, or you identify any which way you identify, right? Just know that you can grow and evolve and shift. And if everything collectively that's happening in our culture and in this world right now is any indication, there are absolutely opportunities for us to be more conscious of all of those factors that can shape a new identity, goodness forbid, like a new identity, as someone who is going to seek support, who's someone who understands that you can be probably much more successful than you already have been by allowing more people and more resources into your life and into your sphere.
Excellent. Dawn, thank you so much. I could talk to you forever. I'm probably going to have a counseling session with you after
It's all
this.
good.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate you so much. Everyone, Ebony, Rosalind, everyone who might have been watching, everyone who will watch this later. If you have questions later, please put them in the comments. I'll make sure I'll get them to Dawn so she can answer anything that she can. If you're listening on the podcast to this later, let us know. If you have any questions, we want to make sure that you get the support that you need. That is what the podcast is all about, what we both are all about, but really making sure that you are taking care of yourselves, I think, especially during this time. So I'm so grateful to you, Dawn, for sharing your insight and message. It was just a deeper dive than I even expected. And again, I feel seen. I feel seen.
Absolutely. We're not alone.
Thank you. We're not alone. That's right. Everyone out there, just remember you are not alone. And I will make sure I put a link to Dawn's website, show notes, description, everywhere so you can find out more about what she's doing. Don't harass her now. But we want you to go. We want you to go find out about the company and the great work that she's doing to support those who support others. Dawn, I love you. Thank you so much.
Always.
Hold on one second. Of course.